Meghan Markle stood at the grand window of Clarence's house, watching the London rain create tiny rivers down the glass. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the delicate china teacup, steam rising from the Earl Grey tea that she barely touched. The weight of royal expectations pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak she had never learned to wear properly. It was her third month as the Duchess of Sussex, and every day felt like walking through a maze blindfolded. The media scrutiny was relentless, dissecting every smile, every outfit choice, every gesture with surgical precision. Headlines screamed about her American background, her Hollywood past, her mixed heritage. The British press seemed determined to find fault in everything she did, comparing her constantly to Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, who seemed to glide through royal duties with effortless grace. "You look troubled, my dear." The warm voice belonged to King Charles, then, still the Prince of Wales, who had quietly entered the room. His presence filled the space with a gentle authority that Meghan had come to associate with safety in this bewildering new world. Meghan turned from the window, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Your Royal Highness. Just adjusting to everything." Her voice carried the weight of unspoken struggles, the kind that came from trying to fit into a mold that seemed designed for someone else entirely. Charles moved closer, his expression softening with genuine concern. Over the past months, he had watched this vibrant, intelligent woman slowly dim under the pressure of royal life. He recognized something in her struggle that reminded him of his own difficult early years in the spotlight, the constant criticism, the feeling of never being quite enough. "Please, sit with me," he said, gesturing to the comfortable chairs by the fireplace. "And, please, when we're alone like this, call me Charles. We're family now, after all." The word family hung in the air between them. Meghan's own father, Thomas Markle, had become a source of pain and embarrassment, selling stories to tabloids and creating chaos during what should have been the happiest time of her life. The absence of a supportive father figure in her new royal journey was a wound that hadn't quite healed. As they settled into their chairs, Charles poured himself tea from the elegant silver service. "I remember my early days in this life," he began, his voice gentle but carrying the wisdom of decades. "The feeling that everyone was watching, waiting for you to make a mistake. The sense that you were representing something so much larger than yourself that it felt impossible to bear." Meghan's eyes widened slightly. She had never heard anyone in the royal family speak so openly about the challenges they faced. "You felt that way too?" "Oh my dear, constantly." Charles chuckled softly. "I spent years feeling like I was disappointing everyone. Too sensitive for some, not traditional enough for others, always caught between what I felt called to do and what was expected of me. The media can be particularly harsh when you don't fit neatly into their predetermined boxes." The fire crackled in the hearth, creating a warm cocoon around their conversation. Meghan felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of isolation she had been carrying. Here was someone who understood, someone who had walked this impossible path before her. "I keep thinking I'm failing Harry," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He gave up so much to marry me, and I can't seem to get anything right. Every appearance, every speech, every photo opportunity feels like a test I'm failing." Charles leaned forward, his eyes kind but serious. "Harry chose love, Meghan. He chose you. Not because you were perfect for royal life, but because you were perfect for him. The rest is just noise that we must learn to navigate together." The word "together" resonated deeply. Meghan had felt so alone in her struggles, even with Harry's support. Her mother, Doria, was an ocean away, and the complex dynamics of royal life were foreign to everyone in her previous circle. But here was Charles, offering something she hadn't expected: understanding and partnership. "I watch you with people," Charles continued, "and I see something remarkable. You have a genuine warmth, an ability to connect with others that can't be taught or manufactured. That's a gift, my dear, not something to be diminished or hidden away to fit someone else's idea of propriety." Meghan thought about her recent visit to a women's shelter, how natural it had felt to sit on the floor with the children, listening to their stories, making them laugh. The palace staff had seemed uncomfortable with her informal approach, but the joy on those children's faces had felt like the most real moment she'd experienced since joining the royal family. "But the press," she said, voicing the fear that kept her awake at night. They make everything seem wrong, like I'm destroying traditions just by existing. Charles sighed deeply, and, for a moment, his carefully maintained composure slipped to reveal the weariness of a man who had spent his entire life under public scrutiny. The press will write their stories regardless of what we do. I learned long ago that we cannot live our lives trying to satisfy their appetite for drama. We must focus on the work, on the people we serve, on building something meaningful despite the noise. He paused, studying her face with the careful attention of someone choosing his words deliberately. I want to share something with you, Meghan. Something I've never told anyone outside my immediate family. Meghan set down her teacup, sensing the importance of whatever Charles was about to reveal. When Diana died, he began, his voice growing quiet with emotion, I made a promise to myself and to her memory. I promised that I would never let anyone in this family face their struggles alone. I failed Diana in many ways, failed to protect her from the very pressures you're experiencing now. I won't make that mistake again. The raw honesty in his voice brought tears to Meghan's eyes. She had heard the stories about Diana's troubled relationship with the royal family, the isolation she felt, the way the institution had failed to support her through her darkest moments. The parallel to her own experience was unmistakable. I see so much of her in you, Charles continued, his voice thick with memory. The compassion, the desire to use this platform for good, the struggle to maintain authenticity in a system that often demands conformity. But, I also see strength in you that I want to nurture, not crush. Meghan wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. I don't know how to do this, Charles. I don't know how to be what everyone expects me to be while still being myself. Charles stood and moved to the window where she had been standing earlier, looking out at the rain that continued to fall on London's ancient streets. Then, don't, he said simply. Don't try to be what everyone expects. Be what the monarchy needs, someone who brings fresh perspective, who connects with people in new ways, who reminds us all that service is about humanity, not just duty. He turned back to face her, and, in his eyes, Meghan saw something she hadn't expected to find in this grand palace: acceptance. Not the conditional acceptance that came with meeting expectations, but the deep, unconditional acceptance of family. I want to propose something to you, Charles said, returning to his chair. I want us to work together, not just as in-laws, but as partners in reimagining what it means to serve the Commonwealth in the 21st century. Your background, your experiences, your perspective, these aren't obstacles to overcome. They're assets that can help us reach people we've never reached before. Meghan felt a spark of excitement for the first time in months. What do you mean? I mean, let's stop apologizing for who you are and start celebrating it. Let's channel your passion for social justice, your understanding of modern media, your connection to diverse communities. Let's use these gifts to modernize the monarchy's approach to service. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. But the traditionalists, the media critics, will complain regardless, Charles finished with a slight smile. But, while they're busy criticizing, we'll be busy doing meaningful work. And, gradually, the work will speak louder than the criticism. They talked for another hour, Charles sharing stories of his own activist work, his environmental campaigns, his decades-long effort to modernize royal charitable efforts. He spoke of his vision for a more inclusive Commonwealth, one that reflected the diverse backgrounds and experiences of all its citizens. As their conversation drew to a close, Charles stood and placed a gentle hand on Meghan's shoulder. I want you to know that you have my full support, my dear. Not just as your father-in-law, but as someone who believes deeply in your ability to make a positive difference in this world. The warmth of his words settled around Meghan like a protective embrace. For the first time since joining the royal family, she felt like she had an ally who truly understood both her struggles and her potential. There's one more thing, Charles said as he prepared to leave. I've spoken with my private secretary about arranging regular meetings between us. I want to be involved in your royal education, to help you navigate the complexities of this life in a way that honors both tradition and your unique gifts. After Charles left, Meghan remained in the chair by the fire, watching the flames dance and feeling something shift fundamentally within her. The fear and isolation that had been her constant companions began to recede, replaced by a tentative hope and a growing sense of purpose. She thought about her father, Thomas, and the pain of his betrayal during her wedding preparations. The tabloid interviews, the staged photographs, the way he had turned what should have been a private family matter into a public spectacle. The absence of his support during the most important transition of her life had left a wound that she thought might never heal. But, sitting in Charles's presence, feeling his genuine care and understanding, Meghan began to see the possibility of a different kind of paternal relationship. One built not on blood or obligation, but on mutual respect, shared values, and a common commitment to service. The rain had stopped while they talked, and now afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. Meghan stood and returned to the window, but this time her reflection showed a woman with straighter shoulders and clearer eyes. She was still facing tremendous challenges, still navigating a world that often felt foreign and hostile, but she was no longer facing it alone. That evening, when Harry returned from his military engagements, he found his wife in their private sitting room, reading through briefings on Charles's environmental initiatives with an intensity he hadn't seen from her in months. "You look different," he observed, kissing her forehead and settling beside her on the sofa. "I had tea with your father today," Meghan said, looking up from her papers with a small smile. "A real conversation, Harry. About the work, about finding my place here, about moving forward instead of just surviving." Harry's face lit up with relief and joy. He had been worried about Meghan's growing isolation, her struggle to find her footing in the royal world. The idea that his father might provide the support and guidance she needed filled him with hope. "He sees something in me, Harry. Something valuable that can contribute to the monarchy's future rather than detract from it. For the first time since we got married, I feel like there might be a path forward that doesn't require me to disappear completely." As they talked late into the night, Meghan shared the details of her conversation with Charles, his offer of partnership, his vision for modernizing royal service. Harry listened with growing excitement, recognizing in her words the return of the passionate, purposeful woman he had fallen in love with. The next morning brought new challenges, as it always did. Tabloid headlines continued their relentless criticism, palace protocol still felt like a foreign language, and the weight of representing the crown remained as heavy as ever. But Meghan faced these challenges with a new resource, the knowledge that she had a powerful ally who believed in her potential and was committed to helping her succeed. The foundation for what would become one of the most significant relationships of Meghan's royal journey had been laid in that quiet afternoon conversation. Charles had extended more than just kindness, he had offered true paternal support to a woman who desperately needed it. In the months and years to come, this relationship would prove to be both a source of strength for Meghan and a transformative force within the royal family itself. 3 weeks after that transformative afternoon tea, Meghan found herself in Charles's private study at Highgrove House, surrounded by towers of books on environmental science, philosophy, and social justice. The room smelled of old leather and fresh flowers from the organic gardens Charles tended himself. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits of possibility. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Charles said, settling into his worn leather chair with a steaming cup of his favorite herbal tea. "About how to best utilize your unique background and perspective in service of the crown. I have a proposal that might interest you." Meghan looked up from the briefing papers she had been studying, her notebook filled with observations and questions about the various charitable initiatives under the Prince of Wales's patronage. Over the past weeks, she had thrown herself into understanding the scope of Charles's work, amazed by the breadth and depth of his commitment to causes ranging from environmental conservation to interfaith dialogue. "I've been working for decades on creating sustainable communities," Charles continued, his eyes lighting up with the passion that always emerged when he discussed his life's work. "But I've always felt we were missing something crucial: authentic voices from diverse backgrounds, people who understand the lived experience of the communities we're trying to serve." He paused, studying Meghan's attentive expression. "I want you to lead a new initiative, something we're calling the Commonwealth Community Bridge Project. It would focus on connecting grassroots organizations across the Commonwealth nations with resources, expertise, and funding to address local challenges while preserving cultural identity." Meghan's heart began to race with excitement. This was exactly the kind of meaningful work she had dreamed of doing when she first understood what marrying into the royal family might make possible. "Tell me more," she said, leaning forward eagerly. Charles smiled at her enthusiasm, recognizing the spark that had been dimmed by months of criticism and constraint. The project would allow you to travel throughout the Commonwealth, not for ceremonial visits, but for substantive engagement. You'd spend time in communities, learning about their specific challenges and opportunities, then help connect them with resources and expertise from other Commonwealth nations facing similar issues. The idea was revolutionary in its simplicity and profound in its potential impact. Instead of the traditional model of royal charity work, visiting organizations to offer encouragement and small donations, this would create lasting networks and sustainable solutions. But, Charles, Meghan said hesitantly, the media, the criticism about my travel, my background. Won't this just fuel more negative coverage? Charles's expression grew serious. Meghan, I learned something important many years ago. When you're doing work that truly matters, criticism is inevitable. But the work itself becomes your shield. When people see the real impact, the genuine change being created, the noise of criticism fades into irrelevance. He stood and walked to a large map of the Commonwealth mounted on his wall, dotted with pins marking various charitable initiatives. Look at this, he said, gesturing to the expanse of nations. 54 countries, 2.4 billion people, representing every race, religion, and culture imaginable. The Commonwealth is already the world's greatest example of unity in diversity. But we've barely scratched the surface of its potential for collaboration and mutual support. Meghan joined him at the map, her mind racing with possibilities. You're talking about creating real partnerships, not just symbolic ones. Exactly, Charles said. And who better to lead this than someone who embodies that unity and diversity? Your American perspective, your understanding of media and communication, your genuine passion for social justice, these aren't obstacles to royal service, they're exactly what this work needs. The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock. Charles's private secretary entered with a file of correspondence. Your Royal Highness, the responses from the Commonwealth High Commissioners about the proposed community bridge project have arrived. Charles accepted the file with barely contained excitement. I took the liberty of floating the concept with several High Commissioners last week, he explained to Meghan. I wanted to gauge interest before presenting it to you formally. As they read through the responses together, Meghan felt her eyes filling with tears. Message after message expressed enthusiasm for the project, with several specifically requesting Meghan's involvement based on her advocacy work prior to joining the royal family. The High Commissioner from Canada wrote, the Duchess of Sussex's commitment to gender equality and her understanding of multicultural societies make her uniquely qualified to lead this initiative. Canadian communities would welcome her engagement wholeheartedly. From Australia, her background in media and social activism could help our Indigenous communities share their stories and connect with similar groups across the Commonwealth. From South Africa, the Duchess represents the kind of modern leadership the Commonwealth needs. Our youth organizations are eager to work with someone who understands contemporary social movements. They want this, Meghan whispered, hardly believing what she was reading. They actually want me to be involved. Of course they do, Charles said gently. You've been so focused on the criticism from British tabloids that you've forgotten the rest of the world sees your value clearly. These are the voices that matter, Meghan, the people who will benefit from the work you'll do. Over the following hours, they developed a detailed plan for the project's launch. Meghan would begin with a listening tour, visiting 6 Commonwealth nations over the course of 4 months. She would spend significant time in each location, not just meeting with government officials but living with local families, participating in community activities, and understanding challenges from the ground up. I want to document everything, Meghan said, her journalistic instincts kicking in. Not just for publicity, but to create a real record of what we learn, what works, what doesn't. This could become a blueprint for community engagement that other organizations could adapt. Charles nodded approvingly. That's excellent thinking. Your media background will be invaluable in ensuring the work gets proper coverage and understanding. As they planned, Meghan felt a profound shift occurring within her. For months, she had felt like she was playing a role in someone else's script, desperately trying to hit marks she didn't understand for an audience that seemed determined to find her lacking. But this felt like returning to her authentic self while also embracing her royal role in a way that felt both natural and meaningful. "There's something else I want to discuss," Charles said as they took a break for lunch in his informal dining room. "Your relationship with the media has been challenging, and I think it's time for a different approach." Meghan's stomach tightened at the mention of media relations. The British tabloids had been relentless in their criticism, often taking her words out of context or interpreting her actions in the most negative possible light. "Instead of trying to manage the tabloids," Charles continued, "which is largely impossible anyway, I think we should focus on building direct relationships with Commonwealth media outlets. Let them tell your story, let them show the work you're doing in their communities." The strategy was both practical and brilliant. By focusing on media outlets in the countries where she would be working, Meghan could bypass the British tabloid filter and speak directly to the people who would be affected by her work. "But won't that anger the British press even more?" Meghan asked. Charles chuckled. "My dear, the British press has been angry with members of this family for generations. It's practically a tradition. The key is not to let their anger dictate our choices or limit our effectiveness." That afternoon, they were joined by Harry, who had driven down from London after completing his military duties. His face lit up when he saw Meghan's animated expression as she explained the Community Bridge project. "You should see her, Papa," Harry said, using his childhood name for Charles. "She hasn't looked this excited about anything since before the wedding." Charles smiled warmly at his son. "Your wife has a brilliant mind for this work, Harry. She's going to revolutionize how the royal family engages with the Commonwealth." The three of them spent the evening refining plans, with Harry contributing insights from his own charitable work with veterans and his understanding of how to navigate royal protocol while maintaining authenticity. It felt like a family planning session, full of laughter, debate, and shared vision. "I have one more surprise," Charles said as they prepared to leave the next morning. "I've arranged for you to meet with someone who might become a valuable mentor for this work." An hour later, Meghan found herself face-to-face with Graca Machel, the former First Lady of Mozambique and widow of Nelson Mandela, who had arrived at Highgrove for what Charles described as an informal chat. Graca's presence filled the garden pavilion where they met, her dignity and grace evident in every gesture. She had lived through the transformation of her country, worked for decades on issues of women's rights and children's welfare, and embodied the kind of principled leadership that Meghan aspired to emulate. "Charles tells me you want to serve the Commonwealth in a new way," Graca said, her voice carrying the musical accent of her homeland. "Tell me what service means to you." Meghan found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, sharing her struggles with finding her place in royal life, her desire to use her platform for meaningful change, and her fears about whether she was strong enough to withstand the criticism that seemed to follow her everywhere. Graca listened with the patient attention of someone who had faced far greater challenges and emerged with her spirit intact. "When I married Nelson," she finally said, "people questioned whether I was worthy of him, whether I could handle the pressure of being with such a prominent figure. The newspapers in South Africa and around the world analyzed every decision I made." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "But I learned that criticism is just noise, child. The work is what matters. The lives you touch, the communities you serve, the change you create, that is your legacy. The rest is just newspapers that will be forgotten tomorrow." They talked for 2 hours, with Graca sharing practical advice about managing public life while maintaining personal integrity, about building coalitions for change, and about the unique position of women married to prominent men who must find their own path to meaningful contribution. "The Commonwealth needs young voices, fresh perspectives," Graca concluded. "Your American background, your mixed heritage, your modern sensibilities, these are gifts, not burdens. Use them fearlessly." As Meghan and Harry drove back to London that evening, Meghan felt fundamentally changed. The weekend had given her not just a project to lead, but a new understanding of her role and potential. Charles had offered her something invaluable, the chance to be herself while serving the crown, to bring her full identity and experience to royal duty rather than hiding it away. "He's giving me what I never had," Meghan said quietly as they navigated London traffic. "What do you mean?" Harry asked. "A father who believes in me, who sees my potential instead of my flaws, who wants to help me succeed instead of change me into someone else." Harry reached over and squeezed her hand. "Papa's always been like that with people he cares about. He just needed time to understand who you really are." The next week brought the official announcement of the Commonwealth Community Bridge Project, with Charles and Meghan appearing together at a press conference that showcased their partnership and shared vision. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with Commonwealth leaders expressing enthusiasm and British commentators grudgingly acknowledging the project's potential value. But, more importantly for Meghan, the announcement marked the beginning of a new chapter in her royal journey. No longer was she struggling to fit into someone else's definition of royal duty, she was helping to create a new model that honored both tradition and innovation. The transformation in her demeanor was visible to everyone around her. Palace staff noted her increased confidence and energy. Harry watched with joy as his wife rediscovered her sense of purpose. And Charles observed with deep satisfaction as the young woman he had come to see as a daughter began to flourish in the role she was born to play. The father-daughter relationship that was growing between Charles and Meghan provided both of them with something they had been missing. For Charles, it offered the chance to mentor and support a bright, capable woman whose perspective challenged and enriched his own thinking. For Meghan, it provided the paternal guidance and unconditional support she had been seeking her entire life. As she prepared for her first Commonwealth tour, Meghan reflected on how much had changed since that rainy afternoon when she had stood at Charles's window feeling lost and alone. The work ahead would be challenging, the criticism would continue, and the pressures of royal life would remain intense. But she was no longer facing these challenges alone. She had found not just an ally, but a true father figure who believed in her dreams and was committed to helping her achieve them. The small village of Mon in Botswana buzzed with excitement as news spread that the Duchess of Sussex would be staying with a local family for 3 days, not in a luxury hotel or government guesthouse, but in a traditional home in the heart of the community. Meghan stood beside Charles on the dusty airstrip, both of them having arrived together for what would be a groundbreaking approach to royal engagement. "Are you ready for this?" Charles asked, his voice carrying both concern and pride as he watched Meghan adjust the simple cotton dress she had chosen for the visit. Gone were the designer outfits that had dominated her early royal appearances, in their place was practical, locally sourced clothing that showed respect for the community she was visiting. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," Meghan replied, her eyes bright with anticipation. The 6 months since the launch of the Community Bridge Project had transformed her from a struggling royal newcomer into a confident advocate with a clear sense of purpose. Their first stop was a meeting with local women who ran a small textile cooperative. Instead of the formal presentations that typically marked royal visits, Meghan sat cross-legged on woven mats, learning to work the traditional looms while listening to stories about the challenges the women faced in accessing broader markets for their beautiful fabrics. "The problem is not lack of skill or demand," explained Nality, the cooperative's leader, as she guided Meghan's hands through the weaving pattern. "We have buyers from South Africa and even Europe who want our work. But we cannot afford the upfront costs for larger orders, and we lack the business training to manage growth." Charles watched from nearby as Meghan asked thoughtful questions, taking detailed notes not just about the business challenges but about the women's lives, their children's education, their hopes for the future. This was the approach they had developed together, deep listening before any attempt at solutions. "What if we could connect you with similar cooperatives in other Commonwealth countries?" Meghan suggested. "Women in Bangladesh have solved the scaling problem, and there's a group in Jamaica that has developed innovative financing models for growth." The idea sparked immediate interest. By the end of the afternoon, they had outlined a plan for a Commonwealth women's cooperative network that would share knowledge, resources, and market opportunities across continents. That evening, Meghan joined the family of Kelabogile Motsware for dinner in their modest home. The family had been chosen not for their prominence but because they represented the average experience of the community, parents working hard to support their children's education while maintaining traditional values in a rapidly changing world. As they shared a simple meal of sorghum porridge and vegetables from the family garden, Meghan found herself thinking about her own upbringing, raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs to provide opportunities her daughter couldn't have imagined. "Tell me about your dreams for your children," Meghan asked Kelabogile, who worked as a nurse at the local clinic. I want them to have education, to travel perhaps, to see the world beyond this village, Kelabogile replied. But I also want them to remember where they come from, to value our traditions, our way of caring for each other. The conversation continued late into the night, with family members sharing stories, asking Meghan about life in America and Britain, and creating the kind of human connection that no formal royal engagement could achieve. Charles, staying in a nearby guesthouse, joined them for breakfast the next morning. He had been conducting his own listening sessions with local environmental groups and traditional leaders, learning about water conservation efforts and sustainable farming practices. I've heard the most remarkable things, he said as they walked together to visit a local school. This community has developed drought-resistant farming techniques that could benefit similar climates throughout the Commonwealth. And their traditional water harvesting methods are more sophisticated than many modern systems. The school visit revealed another opportunity for connection. The students, aged between 12 and 16, had been working on a project to document local climate adaptation strategies. Their research was thorough and their presentations sophisticated, but they lacked access to the broader scientific community where their findings could have real impact. What if we could connect your research with university students in Australia and Canada who are studying similar issues? Meghan suggested to the teacher, Mrs. Sabina. They could collaborate on research, share findings, maybe even develop joint solutions. One student, a confident 15-year-old named Tabo, raised his hand. Your Royal Highness, we've heard about youth climate activists in other countries, but we don't know how to connect with them. Could the Commonwealth help us share our voice? The question sparked an idea that had been forming in Meghan's mind throughout the visit. What if we created a Commonwealth Youth Climate Network, she said, looking at Charles with excitement. Young people from every member nation working together on climate solutions specific to their regions but sharing knowledge and supporting each other. Charles's face lit up with enthusiasm. Environmental activism had been his passion for decades, but he had struggled to effectively engage younger generations. Meghan's approach offered a fresh perspective that could bridge that gap. That afternoon brought an unexpected challenge that would test everything Charles and Meghan had built together. A group of British journalists had arrived in Mon, having tracked down their location despite efforts to keep the visit low profile. The lead reporter, known for his particularly harsh coverage of Meghan, demanded an immediate interview. Your Royal Highness, he called out as Meghan emerged from a meeting with local entrepreneurs, critics are saying this entire project is just an expensive publicity stunt. How do you respond to accusations that you're using Commonwealth resources for personal image rehabilitation? Meghan felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with hostile media encounters. For a moment, the old fears threatened to overwhelm her progress. But then, she felt Charles's steady presence beside her and remembered the women in the textile cooperative, the students with their climate research, the family who had opened their home to her. I'd invite those critics to come here and meet the women who are building sustainable businesses, the students who are developing innovative solutions to climate change, the communities that are creating models for others to follow, she replied calmly. The real story isn't about me, it's about the incredible work happening throughout the Commonwealth that deserves our support and attention. The journalist pressed harder. But the cost of these visits, the security requirements, the disruption to local communities. Charles stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of decades of public service. The cost of this engagement is a fraction of what we spend on traditional royal visits that accomplish far less. And, as for disruption, I suggest you ask the community members themselves how they feel about hosting us. As if on cue, Nality from the textile cooperative appeared, along with several other community leaders. They had heard about the journalist's arrival and come to show their support. The Duchess didn't disrupt our community, Nality said firmly. She listened to us, learned from us, and helped us see new possibilities. This is how royal engagement should work, not just ceremonies and photo opportunities, but real partnership for positive change. The journalist's aggressive questioning continued for several more minutes, but it became clear that the community members who gathered were not interested in his narrative of disruption and waste. They spoke eloquently about the value of being truly heard by someone in a position to help create connections and opportunities. That evening, as Charles and Meghan reflected on the day's events, she felt a new level of confidence in their approach. The hostile media encounter had been challenging, but her response had felt authentic and rooted in the real work they were doing. "I'm proud of how you handled that," Charles said as they sat on the veranda of the guesthouse, watching the sun set over the Kalahari. "You stayed focused on the work, on the people we're here to serve. That's the mark of true leadership." "I felt your support," Meghan replied. "Even when I was afraid, I knew I wasn't facing it alone. That makes all the difference." The conversation turned to their plans for the remaining Commonwealth visits. Each would follow the same model: extended community engagement, listening sessions, and identification of opportunities for cross-Commonwealth collaboration. But they would also document their learnings, creating resources that could help other organizations adopt similar approaches. "I want to write about this," Meghan said suddenly. "Not a memoir or a defense of royal life, but a practical guide to community engagement. Something that shows how to move beyond charity toward true partnership." Charles nodded enthusiastically. "That's brilliant. Your background in writing and communication could help democratize these approaches, make them accessible to organizations without royal resources." The next morning brought their final community meeting, where local leaders presented a comprehensive development plan they had created with input from the various groups Meghan and Charles had met with. The plan wove together economic development, environmental conservation, education, and cultural preservation in a holistic approach that impressed both royals. "This is what we should be supporting," Charles said as they reviewed the document. "Not projects imposed from outside, but solutions developed by communities themselves based on their own priorities and values." As they prepared to leave Botswana, Meghan felt transformed by the experience. The confidence she had gained, the relationships she had built, and the concrete projects that were already taking shape all contributed to a profound sense of accomplishment and purpose. But, perhaps most importantly, she had experienced unconditional support from Charles throughout the visit. When the media attacked, he defended her. When she had new ideas, he encouraged.